Hi, I'm Rick Addig. I'm the assistant track coach at the University of Nebraska in charge of the heptathlon, decathlon, and the pole vault. In my many years of working with long jumpers, I've had the privilege of working with athletes who have jumped from 12 feet all the way up to 26 feet 9 inches. And in those years, I've found that the long jump can be a very simple event to teach. Today in our video we have 3 athletes that's going to jump for us and perform some of our drills and the progressions that we're going to put them through. One of the athletes is Jason, who's 12 years old and has been jumping for a little bit and does have certain problems that he needs to work through. The other one is Catherine, and she's an athlete here at the University of Nebraska. She's a heptathlete and again has kind of gone through some of these progressions this past season and has had some marked improvements in her long jump, but has a lot more ahead of her. The other one is Danny, and Danny is a pole vaulter who's actually gone through some of our long jump drills, and we're going to have him demonstrate some of the drills for us. Not only long jump drills, but some of the running and sprinting drills. In simplifying the teaching process, one of the things that the coach and the athlete needs to understand is that we have certain innate skills within us that we need to learn to tap into. And some of those skills we're going to be discussing a little later on as we go through the video. But one of the purposes of this video is to help you understand these innate skills, how to use them, and then what it is about that innate skill that keeps us from being able to use it. So in the learning and the understanding process, it'll make this event much easier to learn. In making the long jump as simple as possible, we'd like to look at 5 primary objectives for the long jumper. We'd like to see the athlete run down the runway as fast as he or she can control without slowing down into takeoff. The next objective, we'd like to have the athlete take off as close to the scratch line without going over. He or she should then take off with a quick vertical lift without sacrificing speed to do so. The fourth objective, the flight should allow the athlete the most efficient landing position. And finally, the fifth objective, the athlete should maneuver the body in such a way that the entire body and the arms and legs travel beyond the initial point of landing. In understanding a little bit more about the long jump, we need to know what the different phases of the jump is and what the objectives of each phase is. In looking at the long jump, we have 5 phases: the approach, takeoff preparation, the takeoff, flight, and finally the landing. In looking at the approach, we have 4 objectives. In order to jump as far as possible, the athlete must develop maximum controllable speed prior to takeoff. Number 2, the athlete should develop a consistent stride. Third, the athlete should take off as close to the scratch line as possible. And finally, number 4 is during the approach, the athlete should sprint in the proper way so that they're actually prepared for a better takeoff. Takeoff preparation. There are 4 objectives. Number 1, the athlete, in order to prepare for a good takeoff, the athlete must learn to sprint correctly. Number 2, the athlete should have the proper posture for takeoff. Number 3 is the placement of the foot on the next to last stride, which is also referred to as the penultimate stride. And number 4 is developing the proper stride rhythm, where the athlete actually increases rhythm into takeoff. Next is the takeoff. The athlete should strive to get a high angle, high speed takeoff. Number 2, the athlete should minimize the amount of speed lost at takeoff. The flight, the athlete should control the body's rotation and assume a good landing position. And In the landing, there are two objectives. The athlete should position the feet as far forward as the athlete can handle. Number two, the athlete should maneuver the body to clear the initial landing point. Long jumping is a very instinctive event in that it has several skills that will happen naturally if they are allowed to surface. Understanding these innate skills and knowing how to trigger them or what prevents them from surfacing can make the learning or teaching the long jump much easier. The first innate skill is what we refer to as steering. Steering is a subconscious behavior which combines with the use of our depth perception and a conscious goal of stepping on or avoiding something. The skill can be observed in watching a baseball player running the bases, or when a hurdler has to adjust stride to negotiate a hurdle. It is obvious when a long jumper's approach is a little off. The jumper will make a slight stride length adjustment before he or she gets to the board in an effort to avoid scratching or just to get to the board. There are situations, however, where the athlete has made a significant increase in speed since the previous season. In this situation, the athlete may experience problems with scratching. This is due to the fact that the athlete was accustomed to making adjustments according to depth perception at a much slower speed. Since the athlete is now traveling at a higher rate of speed, the usual adjustments are no longer adequate. In looking at this particular skill, there are several uses for steering. One is to avoid scratching. Number two is to influence a quicker rhythm into takeoff. Number three is understanding why an athlete is scratching. Number four, understand how to solve scratching problems. The second innate skill is that of the penultimate stride foot placement. The placement of the penultimate stride is a skill component of jumping that athletes seem to develop as a natural process in adjusting the manner of the foot placement of the next to last stride. The foot is placed in a flatter position than the previous strides, causing the athlete to drop to a lower position. A lower position allows the athletes more time to generate force during takeoff. The use for this particular skill is it allows the athlete to prepare for takeoff by lowering the athlete's center of gravity prior to takeoff. Number two, it helps the coach and athlete to understand the proper mindset to influence a better takeoff preparation. The third innate skill is the stretch reflex. The stretch reflex is an innate reflex that creates a more powerful muscular contraction than a conscious voluntary contraction. When the athlete focuses on a quick takeoff, the muscle will undergo a state of pre-tension prior to planting the takeoff foot. The pre-tensed muscles will resist, allowing the muscle fibers to lengthen. The initial stretching of the fibers is followed by an explosive contraction of the muscles involved. There are two uses. Number one is to make use of a quicker, more explosive takeoff action. Number two, to understand the mindset that will influence the proper stretch reflex. Go ahead. The fourth innate skill is the hitch kick. The hitch kick is a reflex which is the nervous system's way of bringing the body into a more upright position. When a person starts to fall forward or backwards and is unable to take a step in order to catch their balance, he or she will start a windmilling action with the arms and possibly a cycling action with the legs if the athlete is airborne. There are two uses for this particular skill. One is helps you to use a flight that not only slows down the jumper's rotation, but actually counteracts the rotation. Number two, it's an easy style to learn and becomes an extension of the takeoff rather than creating takeoff problems. Teaching the pure beginner to long jump, one of the things that we're trying to do is to set things up in such a way that we're going to use very simple instructions in our efforts to trigger some of these innate skills. And a lot of times if we get the athlete thinking about too many things, the problem is they tend to override those reflexes that we want to have kick in. And some of the reflexes that we're looking at is the steering effect, where they're adjusting stride to avoid scratching. Another one is the stretch reflex that occurs at takeoff, We want the good hitch kick in the air in order to prepare for a good landing. And then the fourth one is the foot placement of the penultimate stride. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to have the athlete start at the long jump board. We're going to have him run backwards, and the idea is to get about 10 strides in, or 5 lefts. And we're going to measure the steps out, and then after he does it, we find where he's fairly consistent. Then we're going to move him forward about a foot. And we're going to move him forward in a foot to kind of crowd him up to the board so that he has to quicken up going into takeoff. And as we focused on, or we talked about earlier, quickening up into takeoff is a really important skill that we want to try to develop. And the steering mechanism is what helps us. What we want the athlete to do when he starts his approach is to start with a really strong, slow rhythm and gradually pick up rhythm to the end. So we're going to work on trying to get 5 lefts, okay? So 5 lefts, starting slow rhythm to a quick rhythm. Okay. Okay. Same spot. Okay, from this point, which is where he just hit, we're going to go ahead and move it forward, about a foot length. What we're trying to do is to make sure that he never has the feeling that he wants to reach for his takeoff. Now, normally when we do this, we don't even let the beginners know that we're doing it. But since we're doing the video, Jason knows that we're doing it, so hopefully he can focus on making sure that he quickens up going into takeoff. The main instructions that we give the athletes is we want them to run fast, we want them to avoid scratching, we want them to touch the board, but we don't want them to go over. Okay? The next thing is we want them to go as far into the sand as possible, land on 1 foot and run out. So we're using what we refer to as a 1 foot run out landing. Good. That's it. As the beginners are starting to run through and take their jumps, one thing you're going to notice is that as they become more confident with the run and more confident with the drill, they'll start running a lot faster. And in some cases, they'll go over their mark or they'll start chopping their steps a lot. And we do want them to learn the steering technique. And in most cases, beginners can pick it up really well. Athletes, once they've jumped a while, they have a little bit of trouble with it sometimes. But in that case, he made nice stride adjustments, he quickened his steps up, and was about this far from scratching and looked pretty good. But as they start getting too close where they're chopping too much, we'll have them inch their steps back a little bit. But always trying to get them to understand that we do not go over the board. This is what's going to help develop that steering skill that'll just happen so that they quicken up going into takeoff. One of the things that I like to emphasize with this simple drill is, of course, the things we've been focusing on. Trying to keep the athlete crowded so that they have to quicken up. Emphasize the fact that they have to stay on the board and not scratch. But we want them to get the feeling of relaxing in there and running out. But the important thing for the coach, and one of the coaching points, is as a coach you got to be patient. It is normally the second, third, or fourth session of these that they go through that becomes their best. And for a lot of young kids, you don't spend a lot of time doing it because it's hard for them to go through those long sessions, especially the younger elementary age kids, who, by the way, a lot of times show some really great technique. In the last two jumps, the only difference in Catherine's run is that we emphasized the fact that we didn't want her to scratch. We wanted her to quicken up to avoid going over the board. So we didn't move the steps back or anything, but there was a difference of about this much space between where she scratched and where her foot was on the last particular jump. So emphasizing always that we don't want to go over the board. Don't allow the athletes to get lazy by letting them jump over the board all the time. Allow them to enhance their steering skills by avoiding that scratch, knowing that they're always responsible for making sure that they don't go over. Once the athlete gets to a point where they're able to relax at takeoff, relax in the air, and run out of their landing, we're going to go ahead and progress into the two-footed landing progression. And what's going to happen is, as the athlete jumps and they're landing in the sand on one foot, they will run out and get a certain distance between the 2 feet as they run out. What we're going to do is gradually decrease that run out stride. So one time they'll land here and have a big step. The next time they'll try to shorten that step up a little bit. Again, patience is important for this particular drill because sometimes it takes just a little bit of time for them to get relaxed enough to where they can allow both feet to land without thinking about it too soon. So they've got to relax, run out, and eventually decrease that run out stride till both feet are hitting at the same time. That particular run out landing, Catherine's stride was about half the distance as it normally was when she would run out. And eventually the next time we're going to try and get it a little bit closer. Okay, this next drill, Catherine's going to try to actually get